Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation to present in this very timely event, I would say, for a number of reasons that I hope I will be able to explain in the next 10 to 15 minutes. I will very quickly go through a number of topics in trying to reach some conclusions. In the process, I will refer to either personal, European, or international initiatives in the domain of big data and big data analytics, just to indicate exemplary cases of what could the potential value for the system, for the citizen, be on capitalizing on the value and extracting value from the big data that we currently assimilate. I will begin by something that might look odd. I will refer back to the Human Genome Project. And I will indicate, I would like to convey to you some recent statistics with respect to the impact that this initiative had on the American economy. Fundamentally, I want to say that some innovations have transformational effects on the society as a whole, and I am one of those that believe that big data has similar potentials. It is worth saying, and I will stop only by indicating that 1 trillion is the estimated economic impact of the Human Genome Project. For each dollar invested by the US on the specific project, $178 have been returned to the economy in job creating, etc., etc. Today, we are in front of another key initiative, again initiated by the United States, which is precision medicine. And the initiative is rooted on the notion of big data and capitalizing on this notion. So what is big data? Again, I borrow a definition by Australia, by an organization in Australia. Big data, it's high volume, high velocity data that is produced quickly, variety of information, which at the same time demands innovative forms of information processing in order for us to obtain insight, gain knowledge, and support decision making. In my view, there are some additional axes to big data, and they relate to veracity, correctness, completeness, and the value. What's the value out of data? And it's obvious that value diminishes as the time from the point of acquisition of the data as we move away from this specific time. I will very briefly now look into some figures so that we get an understanding of what is the order of data that we refer to. We already heard some statistics. I will only say that 90% of all data that exists today was created in the last 2 years. We expect that by 2020, something like 44 times more data than what was existed 6 years ago will be in our hands. And basically, every day we generate globally 2.5 quintillion bytes of data. Huge amounts of data sets. In the domain of biomedicine, at the same time, so globally that's the kind of data generated and that needs to be managed and effectively analyzed. Equally in the domain of biomedicine, the estimations from a number of studies and reports indicate that although historically, and I totally agree with Professor Koutouris, the healthcare industry was one of the most information-intensive industry, has for centuries generated large amounts of data. Today, we are moving into another game. And the complexities in biomedical data relate to, apart from the volume and the size of data, they relate to the fact that we're talking about spatiotemporally data that varies spatially from meters to nanometers, temporally from nanoseconds to years, and data that spans all ranges of the human system from the molecular and submolecular level up to the population. So the obvious challenge of harmonizing and pulling together these huge amounts of diverse and heterogeneous data is there as a challenge, but at the same time, it promises, if successful in doing that, significant benefits. And some of the indicative categories of those benefits relate to improved patient care, supporting basic research in understanding disease evolution, etiology, etc., exploratory analytics, self-care, and a number of other domains. And I will simply glimpse through some of the experiments, through some of examples that are today existing, in trying to see and convince ourselves, if you want, on the potential of big data analytics when applied to healthcare. The traditional domain of clinical care has been a demanding care for all those, a demanding domain for all of us that worked in attempting to achieve this integrated hospital information environment, coding on information, managing and analyzing data at the point of care for a number of reasons. And there is ample evidence of the potential benefits that can be obtained if successful in achieving this level of harmonization and integration at the hospital, at the clinical level. Detecting disease earlier, which allows treatment more easily or more effectively. Detecting fraud might be another dimension that could be relevant to Greece in these days. Detecting and identifying patients at risk for medical complications, predicting length of stay, predicting who would be the most likely patients that would benefit from surgery or an alternative path to therapy, etc., are some of those examples. And again, if we look internationally, we see some big initiatives, some visionary initiatives taking place somewhere. In my understanding, one of those initiatives is what is taking place in the US, the Northwestern Medicine Enterprise Data Warehouse, 80.4 million unique patient records integrated, something like 95 million of inpatient admissions and outpatient visits, 100+ billion data elements. A data element could be a lab test, and something like 14 million new data elements entering the data warehouse daily. And what the directors of those efforts, Dr. Lloyd Jones, in a recent publication, in a recent speech, indicates is that's the future of medicine. It allows us the ability to have in our hands and analyze these huge amounts of spatiotemporal data, allows to tailor treatments, allows medical professionals to identify adverse effects, to optimize, at the end of the day, the treatment and the delivery of care to the patient. And then we have genomics. I will only say a couple of words, because Professor Hadjigeorgiou will deeply, I expect, go into more detail. But again, there are rooted expectations that genomics and the handling of data generated in the genomics domain will pose some of the same challenges as with astronomy, atmospheric science, physics, particle physics have put in front of the scientific community in terms of managing and effectively analyzing this data. Some figures that relate to this is that, and it's only data going back to 2012, there is an explosion of data in the biomedical domain, in the genomics domain. And this explosion continues to take place. And what can we do by having such data into our hands? Develop predictive models. Develop models that assist us to analyze and understand disease evolution. In silico experimentation, develop experiments that would assist us in understanding phenomena in silico. Indicative examples, the Viral Lab, a large European effort. Another domain of applicability or of benefits that we obtain by analyzing this data is to develop models of biological processes that relate to disease. And some of the indicative cases relate from going from modeling the cell as up to the whole organ, and an effort that I am personally involved relates to trying to develop infrastructures and models that relate to trying to understand how cancer evolves. And this is only possible because we have huge multi-level spatiotemporal data in our hands. Indicative, again, as I see it, flagship project in the US, 100,000 genomes project. It will generate something like 21 petabytes of data that would assist them to study rare diseases, to understand a variety or answer, seek questions to a number of unanswered questions today. Very quickly, if you allow me, Mr. Chairman, biomedical text. Medline has 18 million abstracts. 40 to 50,000 abstracts are added every month. It's humanly impossible to analyze and understand this data for decision making. At the same time, we have the pharmaceutical industry going through a potential crisis, as you see there. The number of substances that go therefore new drugs that are approved every year, although the expenditure on funding on the research has increased hugely, is declining. An answer to that is provided by big data analytics of the available literature. Drug repositioning. Find, identify new uses or new combinations of existing drugs that would then more quickly go through the authorization process. An indicative example of how these capabilities can capitalize is a small Greek biotechnology that I again believe is leading the drug repositioning efforts, BioVista. It was also said earlier on, it's not only genome, it's not only our genomics, it's the environment, it's the interaction of a number of behavioral and environmental exposures. So, social determinants of health is another very indicative domain of how we can capitalize of the variety of data that is generated, both clinical but as well as behavioral and other types of data that can be easily accumulated, as the preceding speaker indicated, by wearable technologies and other forms of smart devices that are around us. And again, a flagship initiative in this domain, NIH, the National Research Cohort of 1,000 million, which I only indicate these national and flagship initiatives to indicate or to point towards the need of strategy, which would be my closing remark. I will stop in 2 minutes, Mr. Chairman. Pharmacovigilance, another very, very important domain, identifying, finding solutions to why some people respond to drugs, some not, why some have adverse effects and others do not. Again, in answering these questions, one needs to handle significant amount of data. 1.7 million of reports submitted to NIH, to the FIRE system of NIH last year. Humanly, it's not possible to analyze this. They turn to machine learning, computer science, and in seeking of such solutions. So hopefully through these examples I indicated, or I convinced you, that I think we're moving away from the old age, which was data, but expensive data, and I think, Dimitris, this is the key difference. We always had data in our hands generated by well-designed clinical trials, etc., etc. Today, we are moving in an era where data is cheap and large, but at the same time, they are noisy, they are more heterogeneous, they cover totally diverse scales, spatially and temporally, and therefore, there are new challenges in front of us. And I think one of the fundamental challenges is that we, researchers, must also change our model, the scientific model, which for centuries depended on the most frequentist approach. We design samples, we control, and we reach statistically relevant questions. that has been very expensive. And I think big data today offers a solution to these issues because simply of the huge amount of data that we have in our hands, which allows, yes, through, although messy data, but generate significantly more predictive power in answering a number of questions. So basically, I conclude by saying I think we are in the midst of a new revolution. There is evidence in a number of domains that this new revolution is bringing significant benefits, but we also need to think of how to change culture and the way we approach the management and treatment of this data that is currently becoming available. Thank you very much, and apologies for taking longer than expected.